All right, guys, in this section of notes, we're going to continue on with SOL 6A. You do need to start these on a separate sheet of paper, just so that way we can better distinguish between the branches of government. That way you can go back and look and find things a little bit easier. Even though it is SOL 6A, we are going to look at a different branch of government. In the last section, we looked at the legislative branch. Today, we're going to look at the executive branch of government. Now, a lot of what we wrote down in the last section still applies to this, especially when it comes to the understanding notes. We mentioned yesterday again that a lot of the information for the branches of government, we're looking at the structure and the powers of government, and that all comes from the Constitution. So that will apply here as well to the executive branch. The way that the executive branch is outlined, it comes from the United States Constitution. And again, the structure and the powers of the executive branch comes from the Constitution. And we also discussed that the Constitution basically details that there will be three distinct branches of government. Again, we looked at the legislative branch in the last section. Today we're going to look at the executive, and then we'll look at the judicial tomorrow. Again, just to reiterate, we are focusing on just the national government. We're talking about the United States government. SOL 6, as we pointed out, is all about the national government. We'll get into the state of Virginia and some of our local stuff once we get into SOL 7 and 8. But a lot of the powers that these branches have will apply all throughout all three levels. So again, the jobs that we look at will continue to apply throughout SOL 7 and 8. Just as an example, before we get into these notes, yesterday we looked at how the legislative branch makes the laws, and we said that the legislative branch makes the laws for the country. Well, once we get into Virginia, we're going to find out that the legislative branch in Virginia makes the laws for Virginia. So a lot of the jobs that we look at with these branches of government will continue to apply all throughout SOLs 6, 7, and 8. The one key thing that will change, though, will be the structure of each branch at each level. And we said there's three branches and there's three levels, and we'll get into the levels as we get into SOLs 7 and 8. All right, so for the executive branch of the United States, again, a lot of this is displayed for you up on the wall. It says the executive branch is headed by the President of the United States. The President is the Chief Executive Officer, or as you can abbreviate in the business world, the CEO of the nation. The President's job is to be the leader of the nation. Now, we're going to find out as we move into SOL 6B later on that our branches of government are technically equal, that there are ways for each branch to do jobs that can limit the power of the other branches, but we'll get to that later. The President is the head of the United States. He's the head of the executive branch. Again, a lot of this information is displayed up on the wall. I'll paint up there as soon as I give you guys a chance to write down this information. But again, a lot of this is displayed up on the charts that are on the wall beside the TV. But the executive branch is headed by the President of the United States, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the country. Okay, so again, if you look up at the wall, and we'll take the camera now, paint it up to the wall, you will notice that, again, there is the executive branch. That's the executive branch at the national, state, and local level. The national level is what we're focusing on now. The state government, we'll look at that later on in SOL 7. The local, we'll look at it in SOL 8. But if you zoom in on the national, at the top of the chart is the President of the United States. We'll get into some of the things about the Vice President and some of these bottom charts a little bit later on in the notes. But the President is the head of the executive branch. And the way we know that is it tells us that in the United States Constitution. The U.S. Constitution tells us that the leader of the executive branch will be the President. You can find that out by looking in the Constitution and looking in Article 2. Article 2 tells us that the executive branch will have a president. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Now we get into the powers of the executive branch. So really the structure is just that. The structure of the executive branch is it's headed by the president. Now we get into some of the main jobs and the main powers of the executive branch. The executive branch, the main job, it says the president executes the laws of the land. And you've got that word in bold. He executes the laws of the land. Again, as I stated before we got started today, this job is going to carry on throughout each level. When we get into the state government, we'll find out that the leader of the executive branch in Virginia also executes the law. So the jobs are going to stay the same. But the president executes the laws of the land. One other thing to keep in mind when it comes to the main job of the president, again, that being he executes the laws of the land, is you may see it worded in a variety of different ways. You can also see it worded as the president enforces the laws of the land, or the president carries out the law of the land. On your study guide that I gave you, I actually have it listed all three ways, and I'll show you that here before we wrap up this section of notes, is that in the study guide, it does have it listed as enforcing, executing, and carrying out the law of the land. So again, you may see that worded in any of those three ways, and your study guide does have it listed all three ways. The second job of the president is the president prepares the annual budget for congressional action. And then below it says this means the president will create the budget. It then must be approved by Congress. We saw that last little mention there in your 6A notes on the legislative branch. And we talked about this in the legislative branch notes. The president's job is to make the budget. He prepares it. He gets to decide how to spend the money in the United States. Congress then takes that plan and they have to approve it or unapprove it or disapprove it. It's up to Congress to make the final decision, but the president gets to decide how to spend the money. And this is going to be what we look at in 6B notes when we look at how the branches can limit the power of one another. What keeps the president from making bad decisions with the money is Congress has to approve it. They have to work together. If the president can spend the money however he wanted to or she wanted to, we haven't a female president yet, but maybe one of these days. However the president spends the money, what keeps the president from making bad decisions with the money is Congress has to approve it. So again, Congress has to approve of the president's budget. If Congress votes no, then the president has to prepare a new one. And if they say no to that one, then again, he has to prepare a new budget until finally he or she and Congress come to an agreement on how to spend the money. So the first power of the president is to execute the law. The second power of the president is to make the nation's budget and again decide how to spend the money. And again, this is in the Constitution. The Constitution of the United States tells us all of this information. Just take another minute or two there to write that down, and we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, and then on the next slide, it says the president also appoints cabinet officers, ambassadors, and federal judges. A cabinet officer is actually up on the wall. It's one of the groups that advises and helps the president. We'll look at this in some stuff here in just a little bit later on in class. But the cabinet is the president's main advisors. There's about 15 cabinet members in the United States. It's the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Education, Secretary of Homeland Security. These are all presidential advisors, and they help the president in giving him some advice on making decisions in different areas of expertise. Well, the president gets to pick who his cabinet advisors will be. But now we saw yesterday in the notes on the legislative branch that when the president makes an appointment, okay, we clarified yesterday that we're not talking about a dentist appointment or a doctor's appointment. We're talking about making a selection for someone to fill a job. He is appointing someone to a job. When the president picks someone for a job, the legislative branch has to approve of that appointment. And again, that keeps the president from picking bad people. If he picks a bad person for a cabinet position, Congress can vote no, and then the president would have to pick someone else. The president can also not only appoint cabinet members, but also appoint ambassadors. Ambassadors are American people who represent America in other countries. Again, the president is only one person. The president can't be in different countries at once, so he will appoint ambassadors who will sort of represent the United States, but do so in a foreign country. That way, these people can help relay information and help advise the president on what America needs to do sometimes in foreign countries. Again, the president gets to choose who those people are, but again, they have to be approved by Congress. And then the president gets to appoint federal judges. Anytime a vacancy opens up on a federal or national court, again, you can look up on the wall, we've got the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, and the district courts at the national level. The president gets to choose who fills those jobs. We'll find out later on that when you become a judge at the federal level, you serve for life. You get that position until you decide to retire or you resign, or unfortunately, if you were to pass away while you're a judge, the president gets to pick and choose who takes that position. But again, as we'll review in 6B notes and as we saw in the legislative branch notes, anytime the president chooses someone, the legislative branch gets to vote on whether or not that person gets the job. The legislative branch approves of that appointment. And then the final job of the president that's in the Constitution is the president oversees the executive agencies and departments. We've got some information again on the cabinet and agencies and departments here in just a little bit. Once we wrap up these notes, you'll see some more information about those. I'll pan back up here in just a second and show you the charts again. These are all groups that are part of the executive branch. If you're looking at the wall, we've got the cabinet, you've got federal agencies, you've got regulatory groups. The president is in charge of all of those agencies and all of those groups. He's sort of the boss of the entire executive branch. So he oversees the jobs that those agencies are doing. And again, you'll see what some of these are in the worksheets. We're talking about like the CIA. Okay, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, is kind of overseen by the President of the United States. So he oversees executive agencies and departments. So again, if you look up at the wall, you can see that at the bottom of the chart, there are cabinets, agencies, and regulatory groups that are also a part of the executive branch of government. Again, the president being at the top, he oversees all of those groups that are at the bottom of the chart. So again, those are the four main jobs of the president. The president oversees the executive agencies. He gets to appoint people to certain positions. He gets to choose or pick those. Again, those are cabinet officers, ambassadors, and federal judges. He also makes or prepares the annual budget. Then Congress has to approve of that. And the main job of the president is to enforce or execute or carry out the laws. It's his job to make sure that the laws that the legislative branch makes, and we saw that yesterday, the legislative branch makes the laws. It is the job of the President of the United States to enforce those laws. If you look now at the study guide, you'll see that a lot of this information is listed for you in your study guide. There's the executive branch as part of 6A, the 6A notes, legislative branch from yesterday. Executive branch, headed by the president, You've got some other groups there, the vice president and so forth. And then the jobs of the executive branch are right there. Enforce, execute, and carry out the laws. And all that means is, again, the president has to enforce the laws that the legislative branch makes. Without someone to enforce the laws, and I've said this before and will probably say it again, laws are nothing more than words written on paper. When the legislative branch makes a law, they just, it's words on paper. The speed limit is nothing more than a number on a sign. You need someone to enforce those laws. Without enforcement, then laws are nothing more than just that, words on paper and numbers on a sign. They have to be enforced, and that's the job of the executive branch, to enforce the laws. Okay, with that wraps up the notes on 6B, the executive branch.